One thing that started to happen in the 80s was a backlash against feminism. And so a lot of conservative politicians and groups started to try and create a lot of fear and anxiety on the part of young women that they needed to sort of slow down and be more conservative, and if if they didn't if they didn't find a husband by a certain age, they would never get married. There were all these sort of false statistics about how women would never get married if they didn't get married by the time they were 25, and how if you had a baby after the age of 30, your child would be at risk for all kinds of terrible health problems. And there were these ways they tried to sort of scare young women into slowing down the women's movement, really. So that was one thing that was happening in the 80s and 90s that might have affected some of the media portrayals of girls, and also the idea of feminism became very unpopular with young women and girls in that time period, especially in the 90s. There was a lot of media portrayal of feminism as a really scary thing, that women who were really angry and didn't, hated men, and so young girls and young women didn't want to associate with feminism because it had such a negative media reputation. Even though they believed that they were equal to men and things like that. I was teaching in the 90s, and I would ask my students if they were feminists, and they'd say, well, no, I'm not a feminist. But then they would explain what they believed in, and it would be all the same things that feminists believe in, but they didn't want to use that word. And so the media very successfully convinced young women that feminism was a bad thing, that they didn't want to be associated with. And I think it's because they had gone, they had made a lot of progress, and it scared some people. Mm-hmm. So they had a backlash. In the 90s especially, there was a very strong movement in music culture. And in punk rock bands in particular, there was a girl band movement. Oh. And sometimes they're called the Riot Girls. To represent kind of an aggression, kind of. And a lot of the women who made band, music in that period, they used a lot of the stereotypes about women, and they used a lot of the anti-feminist messages about women in their music, like they fought back against it. There was one, I don't remember the name of the star, but one of the musicians in that time period, on stage, she was kind of known for like reaching under her skirt and removing her tampon and throwing it into the audience.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and there was a band called Hole, Hole, and it was meant to be like representative of a vagina, rather than a phallic thing. And so there was this sort of, yes, we're women and we have power, and maybe you think we're cute, maybe you don't, we don't care, that's not what we're about, kind of fighting back against that assumption that girls were pretty and sweet and vulnerable. And so there was a strong movement in popular music during the 90s of young women, definitely. Well, what it created, though, was a fan base of young women who might not really ever be rock stars themselves, and they might never throw their tampon at anyone, but it created a sense of space for them to express their own frustrations and their own, kind of be angry about the limitations put on them. And it wasn't, the tampon thing wasn't really for the larger culture. That was for the women who were their fans, to sort of appreciate what was happening there. And I think that now, when I look at younger women, I do think that movement opened up certain things in terms of media and culture and just style, and the way that young women are kind of able to, there is a certain way that it's acceptable and understandable, and it fits into the culture for younger women to be not always pretty and sexy. And it's never going to be the most popular thing, because, again, you can't sell to it as easily. But I do think that opened up a sense of freedom for some younger women, individually at least, if not culturally or socially. But I think it changed the culture, slightly shifted the popular culture. I want to make one comment about this. Mm-hmm. I'm talking really almost exclusively about white women here. That music culture was very much a white girls
Okay.
movement. It did not cross race very much.